Thousands of people have died in the storm here recently. Thousands, not hundreds. I called a friend up in Pennsylvania and I said, "Jack, how many people died in the storm down here?"
It happened just 1 minute ago. News so unbelievable that it's sending shockwaves through the entire mountain men community. Eustace Conway, the man who built his life around self-reliance and nature, is once again in the spotlight. But this time, it's not about his wilderness skills. Officials investigating his Turtle Island preserve stumbled upon something inside his old barn that has everyone, from fans to federal agents, asking the same question. What did Eustace hide all these years? Witnesses describe a scene straight out of a mystery novel. Hidden chambers, sealed crates, and something that instantly made authorities call for backup. Stay tuned, because what's inside that barn could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the legendary mountain man. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this story is only just beginning. For decades, Eustace Conway's barn stood quietly on the edge of Turtle Island Preserve, appearing to be nothing more than a simple structure made from hand-hewn logs and weathered wood. To anyone passing by, it was just another piece of his self-sustained paradise, a place where the mountain man stored tools, grain, and memories of a life lived off the grid. But those who've been close to Conway always sensed there was something more to it. The barn wasn't merely storage, it was sacred ground, a space Eustace guarded like a fortress. Locals often joked that he treated it more like a museum than a workshop, warning visitors never to go inside unless he personally gave permission. That secrecy made what happened next all the more unsettling. According to early reports, the discovery began with a simple safety inspection. After recent storms damaged parts of Turtle Island, county officials were dispatched to ensure the old structures were still safe. When they arrived at the barn, they found it locked with heavy iron latches, more than what's typically used for livestock or tools. After multiple attempts to contact Eustace, the team proceeded under supervision from local authorities to enter. Once inside, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The smell of aged pine and oil lingered in the air, but there was something else, something metallic, faintly chemical, and unnervingly sterile. Stacked along the walls were neatly labeled crates, each covered in dust and sealed with old wax. But it wasn't until one of the inspectors accidentally kicked a loose floorboard that the true secret revealed itself. Beneath the planks was a narrow wooden hatch, almost invisible from above. When pried open, it led to a staircase descending into the darkness. The investigators hesitated, shining their flashlights into the opening. What they saw sent chills down their spines: rows of shelves lined with glass jars, rusted instruments, and books wrapped in animal hide. Someone had been working down there, documenting something meticulously and intentionally hidden from sight. The team immediately contacted local law enforcement. When questioned later, one of the first responders reportedly said, "It didn't feel like we were in a barn anymore. It felt like stepping into someone's secret world." Authorities quickly cordoned off the area, ordering everyone to stay back while they examined the contents. That's when Eustace arrived. Witnesses claim he seemed neither shocked nor afraid, just disappointed. He reportedly muttered under his breath, "They weren't supposed to find this yet." For now, officials refused to comment on the nature of what was found below the barn. But insiders say it's unlike anything they've ever seen connected to Eustace Conway. For a man who's dedicated his life to simplicity, this new layer of mystery hints at something far more complex and, perhaps, far more dangerous. When investigators descended into the darkness beneath Eustace Conway's barn, they expected to find old farming tools, maybe some forgotten antiques. Instead, what awaited them looked more like a private archive, an underground vault carefully arranged and preserved. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of formaldehyde. Rows of shelves filled the small chamber, each holding dozens of glass jars. Inside the jars were things no one could easily explain: preserved animal organs, feathers, bones, and even strange botanical specimens that seemed to glow faintly under flashlight beams. Alongside them were hand-bound journals sealed in wax, each labeled with cryptic phrases like cycle study, reversion data, and Project Living Legacy. Investigators said it looked less like the work of a woodsman and more like that of a field scientist, someone obsessed with cataloging every fragment of the natural world. On an old wooden table sat several tools: scalpels, magnifying glasses, syringes, and what appeared to be handmade microscopes built from salvaged glass. Some of the metal instruments were decades old. Others appeared newly forged. Whoever had worked here had done so recently. Even stranger were the crates lined against the back wall. Some bore faded U.S. Forestry Service markings. Others had serial numbers beginning with FED and BIO, suggesting they once belonged to a government project. One crate, when opened, contained reels of film, each labeled with handwritten notes in Eustace's distinct penmanship. One read, Cycle 19, Observations of Conscious Adaptation. Authorities refused to disclose what was on the tapes, but an anonymous insider claimed that what they saw shouldn't exist. The journals, according to early analysis, contained sketches of human anatomy intertwined with diagrams of animal nervous systems, suggesting a study into the parallels between man and beast. There were pages describing experiments in endurance, notes on how the body adapts to starvation, isolation, and cold exposure. Some entries were signed EC, dated as recently as 2019. Others bore no signature at all, as if written by someone else entirely. To make things more unsettling, one corner of the room contained an old chest filled with bones, some animal, but a few undeniably human. Whether they were archaeological finds or something more recent is still under investigation. When questioned, Eustace remained silent. Witnesses at the scene claim he stood at the top of the stairs, watching the investigators with an expression of calm defiance, muttering only one sentence before walking away. "They're not ready to see what I've seen." That line alone has sparked endless speculation. What did he mean by they? Who was he referring to? And most importantly, what kind of discovery could make a man like Eustace Conway, known for his honesty and integrity, risk everything to keep it hidden? Whatever the truth is, one thing is certain. The barn wasn't a storage place at all. It was a vault, and what it held inside might be the most shocking revelation of Eustace's life. By the next morning, Turtle Island Preserve looked less like a peaceful homestead and more like a secured investigation site. Yellow tape surrounded the barn, police vehicles lined the dirt road, and reporters gathered at the property's edge, desperate for answers. For the first time in years, Eustace Conway's sanctuary, his life's work, was swarming with people who didn't understand his world. Inside the barn, investigators meticulously cataloged everything found underground, each item logged and sealed as evidence. The atmosphere was tense. Local officers whispered that the entire scene felt like something out of a government operation, not a small-town inquiry. What baffled them most wasn't just what they found, it was why it was there. What was Eustace, a man who dedicated his life to simplicity and natural living, doing with items that looked like remnants of secret research? When Eustace finally stepped forward to speak, the crowd went silent. Calm and stoic, he didn't deny ownership of the materials. "Everything in that barn," he said, "was put there with intention. The earth hides truths we refuse to see. I only preserved them." That statement raised more questions than it answered. What truths was he talking about? Some reporters pressed him about the crates marked with government codes, but Eustace refused to elaborate. "Those markings," he said, "don't belong to me. They belong to history." Then, without another word, he walked away, leaving investigators stunned. In the hours that followed, several agencies reportedly joined the case, including environmental and historical preservation officials. According to leaks, preliminary findings suggested that some of the artifacts predated Eustace's ownership of the property, possibly going back decades. Could he have uncovered something while expanding his preserve and chosen to hide it instead of reporting it? His followers insist he was merely safeguarding discoveries the modern world would exploit or destroy. But skeptics argue that his behavior showed signs of secrecy bordering on paranoia. Friends described him as focused to the point of obsession in recent years, often spending nights in the barn long after dark. By midday, rumors exploded online, claims of biological experiments, ancient remains, and even classified relics buried beneath Turtle Island. None of it was confirmed, but one undeniable fact remained. The evidence taken from Eustace Conway's barn was now in federal custody. His peaceful image as the wise hermit of the Appalachian Mountains had been shattered. The man once celebrated for living in harmony with nature now stood at the center of a mystery that could rewrite his legacy. Yet through it all, Eustace showed no fear, only quiet conviction. To him, this was never a discovery. It was a revelation long overdue. To understand the shocking discovery beneath Eustace Conway's barn, investigators turned to his past, hoping to uncover what could drive a man devoted to simplicity to hide what looked like a secret laboratory. Born in 1961 in South Carolina, Eustace grew up in a strict academic household where knowledge was valued above all else. His mother was a teacher, and his father, a stern intellectual, pushed him to challenge convention. From an early age, Eustace displayed an unusual fascination with biology and the human condition. While other children played, he dissected small animals to understand how life worked. That curiosity followed him to Appalachian State University, where he studied environmental studies and anthropology. Professors recalled him as brilliant but unconventional, a student who questioned not only human progress, but the moral cost of it. He once wrote in a paper that civilization is the experiment, and nature is the control. It was a chilling statement that hinted at a lifelong obsession with testing human limits. After graduation, he embarked on extreme wilderness expeditions, living in caves and forests, testing his endurance against the elements. Friends said he kept detailed journals about how the human body and mind adapt under pressure. Notes eerily similar to those found in the barn. One of his early companions once recalled Eustace spending an entire winter isolated in the Blue Ridge Mountains with only a knife, saying it was for research. When the investigation team uncovered journals in the barn labeled cycle study and reversion data, it became clear that his experiments hadn't ended decades ago. They had evolved. The diagrams, written in his hand, compared modern anatomy with primitive survival adaptations, suggesting he was studying how to return humanity to a more primal state. Some even theorize he wasn't merely observing nature. He was trying to merge with it. To many, Eustace was a philosopher of the wilderness, but to others, these findings paint him as something far more complex. A man who may have blurred the line between science and survival. And if his past is any indication, what investigators found next would push that line beyond comprehension. When investigators returned to Eustace Conway's barn for a second sweep, they didn't expect to find anything beyond the preserved specimens and journals. But deep behind the stacks of old timber and weathered lumber, one officer noticed a wall panel that didn't quite match the rest. The wood grain ran opposite the others, and when lightly tapped, it produced a hollow echo. They pried it open, and what they found inside silenced the entire room. Hidden behind the panel was a sealed chamber, no bigger than a closet. Inside, lying on a wooden table under a sheet of canvas, was a skeletal figure. At first glance, it appeared human, but as forensic experts soon discovered, it wasn't. The proportions were wrong. The arms were longer, the fingers unnaturally thin, and the jawline narrower than any known human specimen. Even the bone density, when scanned, didn't match standard anatomy. The skeleton had been treated with an unknown preservation compound, one that prevented decay but left the bones with a faint metallic sheen. Some officers believed it was an elaborate hoax. Others weren't so sure. Next to the remains sat an open journal written in Eustace's unmistakable handwriting. The entry read, "Found at creek bed near the ridge. Movement before stillness. Structure beyond human pattern." The date? October 2020, less than 5 years ago. The implications were staggering. Was Eustace documenting a discovery or confessing to something he had created himself? A few investigators whispered that the skeletal structure resembled some of his anatomical sketches labeled adaptive reversion model. If true, it suggested Eustace had been experimenting with or preserving something that defied scientific classification. When questioned again, he gave no direct answers. He reportedly told one officer, "It's not what you think. It's not death. It's transition." Authorities immediately seized the remains and transferred them to a secure facility for study, but none have released details since. The FBI's sudden involvement only fueled rumors that what lay beneath Eustace's barn wasn't from this century or this species. For now, the official explanation remains pending verification. But those who saw the skeleton with their own eyes said the same thing. It wasn't human, and it wasn't ancient. It was something in between. News of the skeleton spread faster than any of the officials could contain it, and within days, the story had escaped into the public. Social media was flooded with speculation, amateur researchers dissecting every leaked photo, and conspiracy channels claiming the discovery proved that Eustace Conway had uncovered evidence of something otherworldly, or something deliberately buried by history. But amid the chaos, one thing became clear. People were taking sides. Supporters of Eustace rallied to his defense, calling him a misunderstood visionary. They argued that the remains were either a teaching model or part of an old anthropological study that Eustace had preserved out of scientific respect. Many pointed to his lifelong dedication to education and preservation as proof that he would never fabricate something for attention. But skeptics and investigators weren't convinced. To them, too many details didn't add up. The strange coded journals, the classified government markings, and the undeniable fact that the bones had never been registered or reported. Some even suggested that Eustace had stumbled upon evidence of an undiscovered species, or perhaps something intentionally hidden by authorities long ago. Through it all, Eustace remained silent, refusing interviews and avoiding public appearances. When he finally did respond, it wasn't through television or press. It was through a handwritten note nailed to the barn door. It read, "Nature is older than truth. What we fear, we bury. What we bury, the earth remembers." Those words only deepened the mystery, sparking a frenzy among those desperate to interpret his meaning. Was he admitting to finding something ancient, or warning the world about what lies beneath our own history? Meanwhile, federal vehicles continued to arrive at Turtle Island Preserve, removing crates and sealed containers under heavy guard. Officials maintained strict secrecy, declining to confirm whether the remains were human or otherwise. But locals whispered that Eustace's demeanor had changed. He stopped teaching classes, spent hours by the river alone, and told close friends that they're not ready for what's coming. Whatever he meant by that remains unknown. What's certain is that the quiet wilderness he once called home had become ground zero for one of the strangest investigations in recent memory. And if rumors about the journals were true, the skeleton might not have been the only secret buried beneath Turtle Island. As investigators continued digging beneath Eustace Conway's barn, what began as a simple excavation turned into something much larger. Beneath the foundation, teams uncovered a series of interconnected tunnels, narrow, hand-carved passages leading deeper into the earth. The walls were lined with timber supports and old lantern hooks, suggesting that whoever built them had spent years working underground. One tunnel extended nearly 200 feet before opening into a larger chamber. Inside were more artifacts: rusted metal cages, glass jars filled with murky liquid, and a massive wooden table covered in old maps and diagrams. The maps didn't just show Turtle Island. They traced deep into the Appalachian Range, marking spots labeled R1 through R7. No one could explain what the symbols meant, but everyone corresponded to remote wilderness areas known for strange local legends. The discovery reignited theories that Eustace had been part of something bigger than anyone realized. A private study, maybe even a covert environmental program dating back decades. One of the documents found in the tunnel bore an official stamp: Department of Interior, 1987. Yet when contacted, the department denied any record of such a file. When Eustace was confronted with the tunnel photos, he remained calm. "Nature keeps records too," he reportedly told an officer. "You just have to dig deep enough to find them." That cryptic statement has since fueled wild speculation online, with some claiming the tunnels were ancient burial chambers, while others believe Eustace expanded them himself to hide discoveries that defied explanation. Whatever the truth, the deeper investigators went, the more they realized this was no simple storage system. It was a constructed network, methodically planned, its design echoing the sketches in Eustace's journals. One agent described it as part mine, part museum, part message. Even more unsettling were the faint carvings on the tunnel walls, symbols resembling constellations, but arranged in patterns not seen in modern star maps. Experts are still analyzing them, but one investigator admitted that it looked more like coordinates than decoration. The search was eventually halted after reports of unstable ground, but not before a final chilling discovery. A second hidden entrance nearly half a mile away, camouflaged beneath fallen trees. It suggested the tunnels extended far beyond the barn, and perhaps connected to something still undiscovered. As darkness fell over Turtle Island, one investigator summed up the mood best. "It's not just what's under the barn that scares us. It's what might still be out there." Weeks passed, and the investigation around Eustace Conway's property reached a boiling point. Officials refused to comment, yet insiders began leaking fragments of what had been discovered in the tunnels. Among the artifacts taken from the site was a final leather-bound journal, written entirely in Eustace's hand and sealed in a metal box. When opened, The first page bore a single sentence. If they find this, the cycle is already repeating. The following entries were filled with calculations, drawings of skeletal structures, and notes describing biological harmony between human form and environment. But what truly shocked investigators was a final section written in red ink, a confession of sorts. Eustace detailed how, decades earlier, he had unearthed remains near Turtle Island's riverbank that did not belong to any known species. He claimed the bones were part of a lineage that predated humanity, something neither beast nor man, but the balance in between. According to his notes, the remains emitted a faint bioluminescent residue, the same substance later found on the skeleton in his barn. He wrote that he kept the discovery hidden to prevent institutional erasure, fearing that once the government knew, the truth would vanish like all the others. The last entry, dated a few months before the investigation, read, "They're waking again beneath the ridge. The land remembers its makers." After that, Eustace vanished. He left Turtle Island without warning, his truck abandoned near the forest edge, tools still neatly arranged on his porch. To this day, his whereabouts remain unknown. Authorities closed the tunnels and seized the property, citing biological hazards, but no official report was ever released. Some say the site now glows faintly at night, a soft light rising from the soil where the barn once stood. Others believe Eustace found what he'd been searching for all his life.
And now it's time for the WHGT World News featured interview. When the acclaimed wildlife artist Sally Middleton met Eustace Conway, she described him as the most interesting man I have ever met.
Moments ago, the family of Eustace Conway broke their long silence and revealed what really happened deep inside the wilderness he called home. For years, fans of mountain men have admired Eustace's grit, his unshakable bond with nature, and his mystical connection to the Blue Ridge Mountains. But behind the peaceful life the cameras captured was a truth he kept hidden even from his closest friends. According to his family, something happened out there, something that changed the way he saw the world forever. They say it wasn't just a man living off the land anymore. It was the land itself that started living through him. What the Conway family has now admitted publicly may explain why Eustace suddenly retreated from the spotlight and why the mountain he loved so dearly has never been the same since. Before we uncover what they found, be sure to like this video, subscribe for more truth-revealing stories, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the moment Eustace's final secret is exposed. Eustace Conway wasn't just another man living in the woods. He was a living symbol of what it meant to truly be free. From the moment he stepped into the Blue Ridge Mountains at age 17, he built his life with nothing but his bare hands, his wits, and an unbreakable bond with nature. He founded Turtle Island Preserve, a sanctuary where people could learn forgotten skills, how to chop wood, tan hides, and live without the noise of modern life. To the public, he was the fearless hero of mountain men, a man who could outlast any storm and outsmart any wilderness. But to his family, there was something deeper, something almost spiritual about his connection to the land. His brother once said, "Eustace doesn't live in the woods live in him." Yet over the years, that connection began to consume him. Family members noticed a subtle change. His letters became shorter, his visits rarer, and his voice quieter, as if the mountain was taking something from him. Those who visited Turtle Island spoke of his long silences, where he'd stare into the forest for minutes at a time, as though he was listening to something no one else could hear. Even his close friends said he'd begun referring to the land as she, describing the forest as alive, breathing, watching, remembering. As his fame grew, Eustace's distance from the outside world only deepened. Cameras captured his triumphs, but not the toll they took. He was a man balancing between two worlds, the modern one that demanded attention and the ancient one that demanded reverence. And soon, that balance began to crumble. His family's recent confession now sheds light on what was really happening during those years, when the man everyone admired was slowly being swallowed by the wilderness he loved. Over time, unsettling whispers began to drift from Turtle Island. Visitors spoke of eerie nights where strange sounds echoed through the valley. Low hums, distant knocking, and soft voices that seemed to come from the trees themselves. Eustace was often seen wandering alone at midnight, a lantern in one hand and a small leather journal in the other, muttering words about the old spirits of the mountain. Those close to him said he'd started leaving bits of food and trinkets by a massive oak deep in the woods, claiming it kept the land calm. While outsiders dismissed it as superstition, his family quietly worried he was losing touch with reality. His nephew recalled visiting once and finding Eustace standing barefoot in a cold stream, whispering something in a language no one recognized. When asked what he was doing, Eustace simply said, "Listening." To him, the forest wasn't silent, it was speaking. Over the years, his journals grew stranger. He wrote of shadows that breathe, of eyes that blink in places where no eyes should be. He claimed animals moved differently when the wind changed, and that the mountain sometimes watched back. The few pages his family has released paint a haunting picture of a man caught between the natural and the supernatural. Even crew members from Mountain Men noticed how protective he'd become of certain areas, refusing to let cameras film there, calling them sacred ground. Those close to him say this was when the change became undeniable. The wilderness was no longer just his home. It had become something else entirely. And soon, the family would uncover something on the property that would prove Eustace's fears might not have been just in his mind. The turning point came when Eustace's nephew, Daniel, made an unplanned visit to Turtle Island after hearing rumors that his uncle's health was failing. He expected to find Eustace working on repairs or tending to his horses, but instead stumbled upon something strange. Deep beyond the main camp, past where the trails ended, a narrow path led to a small structure hidden beneath thick vines and brush. It was a cabin no one in the family had ever seen before, its door reinforced with old timber and sealed tight with rope. When Daniel finally pried it open, the smell of cedar and dust filled the air, but what caught his eye were the countless journals stacked from floor to ceiling. Each page was filled with Eustace's precise handwriting, documenting encounters, weather changes, animal migrations, and something else. He wrote about the Watchers, beings he claimed roamed the woods at night, ancient and unseen, protecting the secrets of the mountain. There were sketches of symbols carved into trees, strange footprints, and one chilling line underlined 3 times. "They come when the fire dies." Daniel showed the journals to Eustace's sister, who confirmed the handwriting was real. The family initially dismissed it as the product of a tired mind, worn down by decades of solitude. But one journal entry stood out, dated only a week before Eustace vanished for 3 full days. The pages ended abruptly mid-sentence, followed by nothing but smudged dirt and what looked like dried mud fingerprints. When Eustace returned, he was silent, pale, and refused to speak about where he had been. He only muttered one thing before retreating into his home: "I went too deep this time." Eustace's disappearance would go down as one of the most terrifying moments his family had ever faced. For 3 days, Turtle Island fell completely silent. The crew from Mountain Men tried to reach him by radio, but there was no answer. His horses were still in their pens, his tools untouched, his rifle hanging by the door. It was as if he had simply walked into the woods and vanished. Search teams combed every inch of the property, but there were no footprints, no broken branches, no trail, nothing. Locals joined in, and even with dogs, no scent could be found. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, Eustace appeared at the edge of the preserve barefoot, covered in scratches and shaking uncontrollably. He didn't recognize anyone at first. His clothes were damp, his eyes distant, and he kept repeating one phrase over and over. "The forest took me." When his nephew tried to bring him inside, Eustace refused, saying the cabin wasn't safe anymore. He slept outside for weeks, barely eating, waking up at night screaming about the mountain calling his name. When he finally began to speak again, his words made little sense. He talked about a tunnel of light between trees, about whispers coming from the ground, and about something ancient beneath the soil, watching him. His family, desperate for answers, searched the area where he was last seen and found claw marks on the inside of his cabin door, as if someone or something had tried to get out. When Eustace saw the marks, he quietly said, "It wasn't trying to hurt me. It was trying to warn me." Those words would haunt the family forever, because from that moment on, Eustace Conway was never quite the same man again. After the incident, the Conway family knew they couldn't ignore what was happening any longer. They drove up to Turtle Island, determined to bring Eustace back to civilization, if only for a few weeks. When they arrived, they found him sitting by the river, staring into the current, his hair tangled and his clothes torn. He didn't look surprised to see them, only tired, as if he had been expecting the visit. His sister, Martha, tried to convince him to come home, but Eustace refused, insisting that leaving the land would break the circle. He told them the mountain had chosen him and that the voices he heard were not hallucinations, but warnings. "There are rules here," he whispered. "If you take too much, it takes back what's owed." That night, his family stayed at Turtle Island, hoping to talk sense into him. But sleep was impossible. They said strange sounds surrounded the camp, branches snapping, faint chanting in the distance, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. When dawn came, they found Eustace already awake, barefoot again, standing in a clearing facing east, motionless as sunlight hit the treetops. He later told them he was greeting the ones who guard the ridge. Convinced something was deeply wrong, the family begged him to seek help. Eustace finally agreed to visit a doctor in Boone, but when they tried to drive him there, he demanded to pull over halfway. He stepped out of the truck and walked into the trees, saying only, "You don't go any further than this." Hours later, he returned calm and smiling, as if nothing had happened. His family described it as eerie, like watching a man possessed one moment and reborn the next. Over the next few months, they noticed his behavior growing stranger. He spoke in riddles about the Watchers and the Keepers of Balance. He'd carve intricate wooden totems and place them around the preserve, claiming they kept the mountain at peace. At first, his relatives believed he was slipping into madness, but after a violent storm hit Turtle Island one night, something inexplicable happened. Every tree surrounding his cabin had been ripped out by the roots, except the small circle where Eustace had placed his totems. The family began to question everything they thought they knew. They no longer saw a man losing his mind. They saw someone living by rules older than time itself. It was during one of his rare visits home that Eustace finally told his family everything. They had gathered around the fireplace, the air tense with unspoken fear, when his brother quietly asked, "What really happened out there, Eustace?" For a long time, he said nothing, just staring into the flames as if the answer was hidden there. Then, in a low voice, he began to speak. He said that weeks before his disappearance, he had wandered deeper into the mountains than ever before, following what he described as a calling in his dreams. The forest had been unusually silent that day. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Eventually, he came across a small clearing where the ground looked disturbed, like something had been buried and unearthed many times. He felt drawn to dig, not out of curiosity, but out of compulsion. Beneath the soil, he found what he believed to be remnants of an ancient burial site. Bones, tools, and carved stones etched with spiral symbols he couldn't recognize. The moment he touched one of the stones, he said the air around him changed. The woods darkened, and he heard what sounded like hundreds of whispers coming from beneath the earth. He ran, but every step felt heavier, like the ground was pulling him back. That night, he claimed the voices followed him home, whispering through the cracks of his cabin walls. They weren't angry, he said. They were watchful, reminding him that some parts of the mountain were never meant to be disturbed. His family sat frozen as he described the days that followed, how the animals avoided him, how the weather shifted violently around Turtle Island, and how the same symbol he had found, carved on those stones, began appearing on nearby trees. When his brother asked if he had taken anything from the site, Eustace nodded slowly and admitted he'd kept one of the carved stones, wrapped in cloth, hidden under his bed. He said, "That's when everything began to spiral. The sleepless nights, the missing time, the feeling that something unseen was always just a few steps behind him." Then he looked at them all and said something that left everyone in silence. "I think the mountain woke up." No one dared to question him after that. Deep down, they could see the fear in his eyes, and the conviction that what he'd encountered wasn't just imagination. It was real. For years, the Conway family stayed silent about what Eustace had told them that night. They were terrified the public would label him unstable, and yet each strange event that followed made them realize there was more truth in his words than anyone wanted to believe. Not long after that confession, severe storms began sweeping across Turtle Island, freak lightning bolts that struck the same ridge over and over again. Trees split clean in half, while untouched areas around Eustace's carved totems remained standing. Wildlife acted unnaturally. Deer stopped crossing near his cabin, birds migrated early, and even his horses refused to enter certain trails. His nephew once caught Eustace standing in that same clearing, whispering toward the ground, saying, "You can rest now." But what he told his family next was far more disturbing. He said he no longer believed he was alone on the land, that the wilderness itself was alive, not in a symbolic way, but in a consciousness humans could not comprehend. He described feeling watched from every direction, not by animals or people, but by something ancient woven into the soil and the roots of the trees. He said the mountain had memory, that every tree, every gust of wind carried stories older than mankind. When storms came, he said they were not random. They were reactions. "When people take without asking," he told his sister, "the mountain screams." His family grew worried that Eustace was descending into delusion. But then they found something undeniable. Hidden behind his cabin were dozens of wooden carvings, faces etched into logs, all with hollow eyes and gaping mouths. Each one matched the same spiral symbol he'd found years earlier. The carvings were arranged in a perfect circle facing east, as though forming a boundary. His nephew swore that every time he visited, the faces seemed to shift slightly, as if watching whoever walked by. When asked why he made them, Eustace said they were reminders to the land that I still listen. Word of these discoveries began to spread quietly among those who had worked on mountain men, and soon his family decided to reveal everything publicly. They believed that by sharing the truth, they could protect Eustace's legacy, not as a man who lost his mind, but as one who crossed into a part of nature no human was meant to understand. Environmental researchers who later studied his journals were stunned by what they found. His weather notes and wildlife observations aligned precisely with real ecological shifts in the region, sometimes recorded days before they occurred. It was as if he could feel the pulse of the land before science could measure it. Even skeptics admitted the patterns were impossible to ignore. To this day, Eustace's family stands by his story, saying he didn't imagine what happened. He experienced something sacred, something that chose him. He became part of the wilderness, his sister said quietly in her final interview, and once it knows your name, it never lets you go. Today, as Eustace Conway's story reaches the hearts of millions, his family's words echo with a strange mixture of pride, sorrow, and reverence. They no longer speak of him as merely a man who lived in the woods. They speak of him as someone who became the wilderness itself. In recent interviews, his sister recalled how Eustace once told her, "When you live close enough to nature, it stops being scenery. It becomes language." Those words now haunt them, especially after everything he revealed about what happened deep in those Carolina mountains. To outsiders, Eustace is the ultimate survivalist, a rugged philosopher who turned his back on modern life to embrace the ancient ways. But to those who know him, he's a man who crossed an invisible boundary, walking so far into nature that he never truly came back. Since stepping away from the cameras, he's lived a life few can even imagine. The old lodge at Turtle Island still stands, surrounded by the same trees that have watched over him for decades. Locals say they sometimes see smoke rising from the valley at dawn, though no one claims to have seen Eustace himself. His family visits occasionally, leaving supplies at the trailhead, never daring to go too deep. They say the air feels heavy there, and the silence carries its own kind of warning. What's even stranger is that every year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, the same ridge where he was last seen glows faintly for a few minutes, as though lightning were trapped beneath the soil. Scientists dismiss it as a natural reaction between minerals and moisture, but for those who knew Eustace, it's something else entirely. The mountain remembering him. The journals he left behind are now preserved, and researchers continue to study them, amazed by the accuracy of his predictions about ecological shifts, storms, and animal migrations. But his family says those pages aren't just science.
Basically, we have two big triangles, a matched pair. And so your boat would suspend right here from a cross member.
Just 1 minute ago, authorities in the Blue Ridge Mountains made a discovery that's leaving everyone speechless. Beneath the land once owned by survivalist legend Eustace Conway, a vast underground tunnel system has finally been found, one that few believed even existed. At first, they thought it was just another cave system, but this was something entirely man-made. Reinforced beams, carefully carved walls, and hidden entrances all pointed to years of deliberate work. What they didn't expect was where it led. Locals have long spoken about Eustace's strange disappearances into the forest, the long hours he spent digging, and his cryptic words about the earth holding the secrets of freedom. Now, it seems those words weren't just philosophy, they were blueprints. The tunnels snake beneath Turtle Island Preserve, a private wilderness Eustace spent his life protecting. But when searchers followed one passage to its end, they uncovered something that changes everything about who he was and what he might have been hiding. Before we reveal what lies below, make sure to subscribe and stay with us, because what's waiting in those tunnels might rewrite everything we thought we knew about Eustace Conway. It all began with what seemed like an ordinary problem. Heavy rains had swept across the Blue Ridge, and caretakers at Turtle Island Preserve noticed unusual depressions forming near the edge of the property. One morning, a young volunteer named Caleb stumbled upon a sinkhole that looked oddly uniform, too perfectly shaped to be natural. As he cleared the mud, his shovel struck something hard and metallic. After hours of digging, he revealed what looked like an old iron hatch, almost fossilized by time, its hinges buried under decades of clay and roots. No one could explain why it was there. Some thought it might have been a storm shelter from the Civil War era, but Eustace's personal markings on the latch told another story. When they finally pried it open, a deep, musty gust of air rushed out, cold, ancient, and heavy with the scent of earth that hadn't breathed in years. Beneath the hatch, a wooden ladder descended into darkness. The rungs were worn smooth by use, but remarkably intact, as though someone had been maintaining them not too long ago. Holding flashlights, the team climbed down one by one. At the bottom, they found themselves in a narrow tunnel that stretched farther than their lights could reach. The walls were reinforced with precisely cut logs, each notched together in a style instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with Eustace's craftsmanship. As they ventured deeper, strange details emerged. Symbols carved into the beams, jars filled with herbs and animal bones, neatly stacked on shelves, and old lanterns coated in dust. Someone had lived or worked down here for a long time. The tunnel wasn't random. It had structure, direction, and purpose. Following the winding passage, they reached a larger chamber, where remnants of tools lay scattered: pickaxes, spades, and what appeared to be a handmade pulley system used to haul debris. Every inch of it screamed Eustace's name. It was meticulous, practical, and yet deeply spiritual. Locals recalled how he used to disappear for hours, sometimes whole days, heading into the woods with supplies and returning coated in mud. He'd smile, but never explain where he'd been. Many thought he was simply meditating in solitude, as he often preached about finding truth beneath the surface. But now, the literal meaning of that phrase echoed chillingly in everyone's mind. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. This wasn't a simple hideaway. It was a network. Each tunnel branched off in multiple directions, some caved in, others too tight to enter. The team realized they were only scratching the surface of something much bigger, something that Eustace may have spent decades creating in secret. The purpose of this underground system remained unclear, but one thing was certain: it wasn't meant to be found. When they emerged from the tunnel hours later, covered in dirt and shaken by what they'd seen, one caretaker whispered, he wasn't just surviving out here, he was preparing for something. When the exploration team returned to the site, they brought better lighting and gear, determined to map the entire system. As they descended through the hatch again, the smell of wet earth grew heavier, and the air turned colder. The deeper they went, the more they realized this wasn't just a tunnel. It was an entire subterranean world. The first chamber stretched nearly 20 feet across, its walls carefully reinforced with stone and timber. On one side sat a crude workbench littered with chisels, leather gloves, and rusted tins. Above it, candle soot painted black streaks on the ceiling, suggesting Eustace had spent long nights working down here. They followed a narrow corridor branching to the left and discovered what looked like a storage room. Dozens of glass jars lined the shelves, each sealed with wax and labeled in Eustace's handwriting. Roots, herbs, powders, and dried leaves. Some of the jars were filled with preserved meat and animal fat, the kind of supplies meant to last through months of isolation. Whoever built this place wasn't preparing for a single night underground. This was a survival system designed to sustain life. As they continued, the tunnel began to twist sharply, leading to a slope that dropped into a lower level. There, they found the remains of an old handcart and a pulley system fixed into the ceiling, an ingenious setup for hauling soil and rocks to the surface. Eustace's engineering skill was on full display. Each beam was measured, each support strategically placed. It was both art and survival science combined. Yet, what made the team uneasy were the markings on the walls. Symbols, hand-carved, repetitive, almost ritualistic, ran along the tunnel edges. Some resembled mountains, others spirals, and one particular symbol appeared again and again, an eye surrounded by roots. Experts later traced that design to ancient Appalachian folklore, representing the Watcher beneath the ground, a guardian of the natural world. Whether Eustace used it as protection or symbolism remains unknown. After several turns, they reached what appeared to be the heart of the labyrinth, a vast chamber that stretched beyond the beam of their lights. In its center lay a large stone slab surrounded by melted candles, bundles of sage, and pieces of animal bone carefully arranged in geometric patterns. The air was still, silent, heavy with meaning. This wasn't just a workspace, it was a shrine. The walls were covered with charcoal drawings of mountains, trees, rivers, and human figures intertwined with roots. It felt spiritual, almost sacred. Some say Eustace believed these tunnels connected him directly to the spirit of the mountain, that each chamber represented a stage of harmony between man and earth. But before they could explore further, one of the team members spotted something unusual on the far side of the chamber, a sealed wooden door reinforced with iron bars, hidden behind a layer of mud and moss. And carved into the wood were the words, "The deeper you go, the more truth you find." No one knew what waited beyond that door, but the moment they opened it, the mystery of Eustace's tunnels took an even darker turn. The team stood frozen before the wooden door, its iron hinges eaten away by rust, but still solid enough to hold back whatever was behind it. The message carved into the surface, "The deeper you go, the more truth you find," sent chills through everyone. Using crowbars, they pried it open, the sound of cracking timber echoing through the underground corridors like a scream. A blast of air rushed out, thick and stale, as if it hadn't moved in decades. When their flashlights pierced the darkness, what they saw didn't match the rustic craftsmanship of the earlier tunnels. The walls here were made of concrete. The beams were replaced by steel. It was colder, sharper, and mechanical. Nothing like Eustace's organic handiwork. The floor was lined with remnants of wiring, corroded pipes, and fragments of metal that looked military in origin. It was as if someone else had continued his work, turning his humble refuge into something much more complex. In the center of the room stood a large ventilation shaft leading straight up. No one knew where it ended. One of the men shone his light upward, but the beam disappeared into endless blackness. This section had power lines, old insulated cables that seemed to run toward the far wall, where an ancient control box sat. When they opened it, they found fragments of radio parts, coils, and antenna wires. Whoever had modified this chamber had knowledge of communication systems, something Eustace was never publicly known for. Could it be that someone else used this place after him? Or was Eustace communicating with off-grid contacts we never knew existed? Among the scattered debris, one explorer picked up a rusted tin containing rolled parchment, sealed in wax. Inside were sketches of radio towers, coded frequency numbers, and notations written in Eustace's handwriting. The words "Sky Net of Freedom" appeared several times, along with references to electromagnetic lines of communication. Historians later found that Eustace once mentioned wanting to live beyond the reach of all signals. Maybe he wasn't hiding from modern society. Maybe he was building a way to live beyond it. As they explored further into the steel-lined room, another clue appeared. A crate containing gas masks, old flashlights, and emergency supplies wrapped in oilcloth. These weren't primitive items, they were military-grade, and stamped faintly on the side of one crate were the letters U.S. Dept of Interior, 1964. It made no sense. This was long before Eustace even purchased Turtle Island Preserve. Could someone else have begun this network before him, and Eustace merely expanded it? The timeline was collapsing into confusion. Whatever the explanation, one thing was clear. This chamber wasn't just a shelter. It was a command post. The strange mixture of survival tools, communication equipment, and ritual markings made the team realize they were standing in something far more elaborate than a hideout. When one explorer brushed away the dirt from a side panel, he noticed something else, a faint outline of another doorway, this time sealed completely with concrete. Eustace had walled it off intentionally. What was so important that he'd go to such lengths to hide it? As they debated whether to break through, one of them whispered, "What if we're not supposed to see what's behind there?" But curiosity won. They began chipping away at the wall, unaware that what lay beyond would finally explain why Eustace built the tunnels, and what he was really protecting. After hours of careful work, the team broke through the concrete wall. The air that escaped was dry and strangely warm, as if it had been sealed for half a century. Beyond it, they found another corridor, this one narrower and sloping downward at a steep angle. Unlike the earlier sections, this tunnel seemed freshly cut. The soil was loose, the supports newer, and faint markings on the walls suggested Eustace had continued digging late into his life. As they followed the path, the sound of dripping water echoed in the distance. It felt less like a man-made tunnel now, and more like a living organism, breathing and creaking around them. Several hundred feet in, the narrow passage opened into a chamber where the earth gave way to rock. A faint draft hinted at an exit somewhere nearby. Then, one explorer's flashlight caught something unusual. Wood planks covering what appeared to be a large circular opening in the ground. When they removed them, they discovered a narrow shaft leading diagonally upward. The tunnel, it turned out, extended far beyond the property line, carving its way toward the Watauga River. They followed it for nearly half a mile until it ended at an iron hatch cleverly disguised beneath a massive fallen log near the water's edge. When they lifted it, morning light streamed through for the first time in decades. This wasn't a random escape tunnel. It was precision work. angled perfectly toward the river, with a concealed outlet that could only be seen from one direction. Locals later confirmed that Eustace often camped near this very stretch of river, calling it his freedom line. It now seemed clear that the tunnel was designed as an exit route, a way to disappear into nature instantly. But why would Eustace, who always preached about transparency, simplicity, and living openly with the land, need an escape route? Those who knew him best say he grew increasingly distrustful of outside interference after repeated clashes with government officials over land regulations. He once said, "They want to own the air I breathe." The tunnel system, then, might have been his ultimate act of defiance, a physical embodiment of independence, built to ensure he could live by his own rules, no matter what. Yet the deeper meaning ran even stronger. The final chamber before the river was unlike the rest. Inside were strange arrangements of stones forming circular patterns on the floor. At the center sat an old wooden chest, wrapped in animal hide and bound with rope. When they opened it, they found handwritten letters and a small journal. One entry read, "Freedom cannot exist above ground anymore. The world's roots are safer than its sky." Another page contained what looked like coordinates, numbers etched deeply into the page. When plotted, they pointed to a remote section of the Appalachian foothills, miles from Turtle Island. Could there be more tunnels there, part of a much larger network? Or was it a symbolic message, pointing toward something Eustace wanted to remain undiscovered? For now, no one could tell. But as the team sealed the hatch behind them, they couldn't shake the feeling that the tunnels weren't just Eustace's hiding place. They were his message to the world. Freedom isn't something you live above the ground. It's something you build beneath it. Days later, determined to uncover the full truth, the exploration team returned with stronger equipment and descended once more into Eustace Conway's secret underground world. This time, they focused on the smaller passageways branching off from the main chambers. One of these side tunnels led them into an area they hadn't explored before, a narrow crawl space that opened into what they would soon call the Forbidden Room. The entrance was partially collapsed, sealed off by thick layers of rock and timber, almost as if Eustace himself had tried to bury it. After hours of digging through the rubble, they finally cleared a path wide enough to squeeze through. What they found inside made everyone fall silent. The air was dense, still and cold, carrying the faint scent of smoke and aged wood. Against the far wall stood a wooden table covered in wax-sealed jars, leather-bound books, and folded maps drawn by hand. Dozens of candles, long melted into the dirt floor, surrounded a stone pedestal in the center of the room. On that pedestal rested an old animal skull carved with intricate markings. It wasn't random. The pattern matched ancient Appalachian spiritual symbols, many linked to Cherokee burial traditions. What was a survivalist like Eustace doing with ritual carvings and ceremonial objects hidden underground? Some theorized that this was where Eustace performed his spiritual studies, blending native traditions with his own philosophy about man's connection to the earth. On one wall hung a framed photograph, badly faded, showing a young Eustace standing beside his father near what looked like a strange rock formation. Locals who later analyzed the photo realized the formation could only be seen from inside a specific section of the tunnels, suggesting that Eustace may have recreated a sacred site from his childhood. As the team examined the books, they discovered pages filled with personal reflections, entries that blurred the line between survivalism and mysticism. He wrote of hearing the heartbeat of the earth, of following whispers in the soil that led him to the resting place of old wisdom. It was clear this room wasn't about storage or escape. It was about preservation. Artifacts lined the walls. Arrowheads, broken pottery, animal pelts, even handmade tools that looked older than anything Eustace could have crafted alone. Some items were tagged with labels like Echoes of the Ancients and Return to Light. It was as if he was building a museum beneath the mountain, protecting relics that didn't belong to any one generation. But one discovery changed the tone of the entire dig. Hidden in a wooden chest beneath the pedestal was a letter sealed in wax, addressed simply to the next listener. The letter's message was brief but haunting. If you've found this place, then the mountain has chosen to reveal what man tried to forget. Do not disturb what sleeps. The tunnels are alive, and they remember. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably Eustace's. After reading those words, the crew decided to leave the chamber untouched, sealing it back as they had found it. Yet none of them could shake the eerie sensation that something ancient had been awakened. Some say the earth itself feels different now around Turtle Island. Quiet, but watchful. As though Eustace's tunnels really do have a pulse of their own. In the weeks after the discovery of the Forbidden Room, the once quiet hills around Turtle Island Preserve became the center of attention. Historians, archaeologists, and even spiritual scholars gathered to study what Eustace Conway had built. Yet the more they uncovered, the clearer it became that his tunnels weren't about hiding. They were about meaning. Every passage, chamber, and carving seemed to form a story, as if Eustace had turned the mountain itself into a diary of his beliefs. The deeper they looked, the more patterns emerged. The layout of the tunnels wasn't random. It followed a deliberate sequence that reflected a cycle of life. The first chamber symbolized survival, filled with preserved food, tools, and supplies. The second represented knowledge, with shelves of books, jars, and notes about natural medicine and philosophy. The third, the Forbidden Room, was about memory, where man's spirit meets the earth's silence. Each level mirrored his teachings about harmony between people and nature. Eustace wasn't running from society. He was carving his life's message into the land itself. His journals, written in careful yet poetic language, hinted at the tunnels being his roots of freedom. He wrote, "When the world forgets the wild, I will build it beneath their feet." To him, going underground wasn't escape, it was connection. He believed that just as trees draw life from the soil, mankind must return to the earth to rediscover truth. Archaeologists noticed something else. Each tunnel aligned almost perfectly with natural features above ground. A spring, a ridge, a grove of oaks. When mapped from above, the layout formed what looked like a tree. The branches represented by the tunnels, the trunk by the main shaft leading to the surface. It was no accident. Eustace had designed his underground world as a living symbol, where every turn reflected nature's design. Even more puzzling was how the tunnels seemed to align with natural magnetic lines beneath the land, something only advanced geological instruments could detect. Yet Eustace had done it decades ago, guided purely by instinct. Locals who knew him said he often spoke about listening to the pull of the mountain. Maybe he wasn't being poetic. Maybe he truly could feel it. Scholars of Appalachian folklore later compared his construction to ancient earth sanctuaries, where spiritual seekers would descend underground to reconnect with the spirit world. The resemblance was uncanny. His tunnels were not just physical shelters, they were spiritual corridors. They told a story of transformation, of humanity's descent into darkness to rediscover light. Over time, Eustace's legend has shifted from that of a simple mountain man to that of a visionary who saw the earth as a living being. His tunnels weren't about survival. They were a sermon, written not in ink, but in clay and stone. Yet, one tunnel still defies explanation, the final one leading toward the river. Its design was too deliberate, its direction too perfect. Some say it leads to a natural energy, source hidden beneath the mountains. Others believe it leads to something Eustace found, something he never told anyone about. What's certain is that his tunnels changed how we see him forever. Eustace Conway wasn't just a man of the wilderness. He became part of it. His final message, etched beneath the Blue Ridge Mountains, still whispers today, "Freedom doesn't live above ground. It grows beneath it." When experts finally followed the coordinates written in Eustace Conway's final journal, they found themselves deep in the Appalachian wilderness, miles from Turtle Island Preserve. The path led them to a dense forest where the air felt untouched, the silence thick and heavy. After days of searching, they stumbled upon a small opening near a spring that fed directly into the Watauga River. The entrance looked natural, but closer inspection revealed the same handcrafted beamwork seen in Eustace's tunnels. This was it, the continuation of his underground network, the place his writings called the Path of Return. As they descended into the narrow shaft, they found signs that Eustace had been there. Old candles, leather gloves, and a makeshift stool carved from tree roots. The tunnel curved for several hundred feet before ending in a circular stone chamber. Unlike the earlier rooms, this one was different, simpler, cleaner, almost sacred. In the center lay a single wooden chest covered in dust. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was Eustace's final note. The handwriting trembled, but remained clear. "If you are here, then you have found the end of my road. I built this not to hide from the world, but to remind it what freedom feels like."
This looks like a good spot. I see a bunch of downed trees right there. And how was it for you guys in that big storm?
It was windy.
But our cabin stayed all good.
Yeah.
Good.
At 64, Eustace Conway has finally confirmed what fans have whispered about for decades. Known as the man who traded modern comfort for the harsh beauty of the wilderness, Eustace has always been a mystery, wrapped in simplicity. But this time, he's speaking openly, revealing the truth behind his lifelong mission, and it's far more personal than anyone imagined. From the way he built Turtle Island to the silent battles he fought away from the cameras, his confession leaves no doubt. The man who inspired millions with his rugged self-reliance was carrying a secret all along. Before we uncover what he finally admitted, make sure to subscribe, because this revelation changes everything we thought we knew about him. Long before this revelation, the signs were already there for those who paid attention. Visitors to Turtle Island often described Eustace as calm yet restless, a man whose eyes carried the weight of unspoken truths. Crew members from Mountain Men recalled how he'd pause mid-conversation, staring off into the forest as if listening to something no one else could hear. When interviewers pressed about his past, or what drove him to abandon civilization, he'd deflect with a quiet smile. Locals in Boone, North Carolina, remembered whispers of family conflict, legal troubles, and land disputes that seemed to haunt him. Still, Eustace never spoke ill of anyone. He just kept building, chopping wood, and living by his code. Yet those closest to him began to notice patterns. He avoided cameras during certain days, kept journals no one was allowed to read, and talked about protecting something bigger than himself. Former apprentices have even said that Eustace would sometimes disappear into the forest for days without explanation, returning with a distant look and a notebook filled with sketches and cryptic notes. A few believed he was recording something more than just nature observations. Others whispered he was testing the land, measuring something only he understood. Even the way he managed Turtle Island changed subtly over time. Structures were moved, certain areas fenced off, and entire zones declared off-limits. "He's not just living out here," one friend once said. "He's guarding something." Every small clue hinted that behind the calm voice and simple life, there was a deeper story, one that he wasn't ready to share. Until now. As Eustace's fame grew, so did the tension between his ideals and the modern world. What started as a peaceful refuge on Turtle Island soon became a battleground between his vision and society's regulations. Over the years, he faced countless inspections, zoning violations, and lawsuits, all because his way of life didn't fit into the world's rules. He once said, "Freedom doesn't exist on paper, it exists in the dirt under your feet," a statement that would later define his philosophy. Friends recall nights where he'd sit by the fire, staring into the flames, muttering that they'll never let people live free anymore. Local authorities accused him of operating without permits, while media producers pushed him to exaggerate his persona for better ratings. But Eustace resisted. He refused to fake the wilderness, even when it cost him contracts and partnerships. His battles weren't only legal, they were spiritual. Letters from old companions reveal how deeply the conflict cut him. In one, he wrote, "I'm not fighting for myself. I'm fighting for the right to live the truth." The more he tried to prove that harmony with nature was possible, the more he was misunderstood. His land became both sanctuary and symbol, a living rebellion against everything society demanded. Some claim that at his lowest point, he almost walked away from Turtle Island entirely, tired of the endless interference. Yet something kept him there, something he couldn't let go of. He told one close friend, "If I leave, the message dies with me." That message, whatever it was, became his unspoken vow. The man who appeared calm on screen was waging a private war for authenticity, truth, and the right to exist outside the system that tried to silence him. Behind Eustace Conway's weathered face and calm presence was a man carrying years of emotional weight most people could never imagine. To the outside world, he was the perfect embodiment of rugged freedom, a man who conquered nature and lived life on his own terms. But those who truly knew him said the solitude came at a heavy cost. Eustace had given up more than comfort and technology. He had given up connection. Over the decades, his dedication to Turtle Island consumed every part of his existence. He often said that the land never lies, but those who worked alongside him noticed that his eyes told a story of loneliness. He had no wife, no children, and few lasting friendships. Every visitor who left Turtle Island took a small part of his heart with them. Apprentices came and went, some staying only days, others months. But Eustace rarely let anyone close enough to understand what truly haunted him. There were times he'd spend nights alone by the fire, writing in his journals by lantern light. He recorded thoughts about the changing world, his parents, and his deep fear that humanity was forgetting how to live honestly. In one entry later discovered by a former student, Eustace wrote, "I built this place to remind myself who we were, but sometimes I forget who I am." Those words echoed through the hills like a confession whispered to the trees. He often spoke of his father, Eustace Sr., a strict man who believed in hard work and discipline. Their relationship had been strained, defined by admiration and disappointment. His father couldn't understand why his son rejected a life of education and comfort for dirt floors and hand-built cabins. Yet it was that very rejection that shaped Eustace into who he became, a man searching for truth through pain. 9. Another passage, he admitted. I thought by leaving the world, I'd find peace. Instead, I found a mirror. Each storm that tore through Turtle Island felt like nature reflecting his own turmoil. The death of friends, the departure of apprentices, the constant fight with bureaucracy, all chipped away at him slowly. Yet even in his darkest moments, he never stopped building, never stopped teaching. His pain became his teacher, and through it, he found purpose. When Mountain Men cameras weren't rolling, he often sat on a log outside his cabin, staring into the woods in complete silence. Crew members said those moments could last hours. It's like he was talking to something out there, one of them recalled. Whether it was nature, his memories, or his regrets, no one could tell. But one thing was certain. Eustace's silence spoke louder than words ever could. It was in that silence that he confronted the ghosts of his choices, the ache of isolation, and the unspoken truth that freedom can also be lonely. Deep down, he knew that the wilderness didn't just shape him, it revealed him. And that revelation, as painful as it was, would soon lead him to the moment he finally told the world everything he'd kept hidden. It was early 2024 when everything began to change for Eustace Conway. The quiet, deliberate man who had spent most of his adult life avoiding attention finally decided to open up about the truth behind his life's work. For years, people had speculated about his motives. Some believed Turtle Island was simply a survivalist's paradise, while others suspected it was a refuge from something darker. But what happened that winter morning during a private, off-camera interview with a documentary crew would shift everything we thought we knew about him. Eustace agreed to talk, not as a TV personality, not as a wilderness icon, but as a man who had finally made peace with his past. Sitting on a rough-hewn bench made from fallen cedar, he stared into the mist and said, "I didn't come out here to escape the world. I came here to understand it." Those words set the tone for what became one of the most revealing conversations of his life. The interviewer pressed gently, asking what he meant. Eustace took a long breath, his calloused hands resting on his knees. "People think I built Turtle Island to get away," he said. "But what I really built was a mirror for humanity." He explained that every lesson, every cabin, every student who came through his camp was part of a living experiment. He wanted to prove that people could still live freely, honestly, and in harmony with the earth, but he also wanted to see if anyone still had the courage to do it. Over time, he realized that most people didn't. They love the idea, he said, but they're afraid of the truth. The crew described a visible weight lifting off him as he spoke. For the first time, Eustace seemed ready to address the pain, the isolation, and the misunderstanding that came with his life's mission. He admitted that he had spent years battling guilt. Guilt for leaving behind people who loved him. Guilt for watching society decay while he hid in the woods. And guilt for staying silent while the world drifted further from nature. Every tree I cut, every roof I built, was a way to make peace with the fact that I couldn't save everyone, he confessed. He revealed that what finally pushed him to speak wasn't fame, money, or public curiosity, but fear. Fear that when he was gone, his message would die with him. "I've outlived some of the people I thought would carry the torch," he said softly, "and I realized that maybe it was never about them. It was about me finding the courage to tell the truth before it's too late." The wind howled through the trees as if nature itself was listening. He paused, looked toward the distant ridge, and said quietly, People called me crazy for leaving society. But maybe I just saw what was coming before they did. That day, for the first time in decades, Eustace didn't hide behind metaphors or half-answers. He confirmed that his life in the wilderness was more than survival. It was his way of warning the world. "The land teaches you everything," he said, "but only if you're willing to listen." His tone carried both pride and sorrow. Pride in what he had built, and sorrow that so few had truly understood it. Those who were present said it felt like a chapter of history was closing right in front of them. From that moment on, Eustace wasn't just a mountain man. He became a messenger, finally ready to tell the story that had lived within him all these years. What came next would redefine his entire legacy, leaving even his most loyal followers stunned by what he finally revealed. When Eustace finally spoke the words that would change how the world saw him, there was a long silence after. He took a deep breath, looked toward the towering oaks around his cabin, and said, "I never built Turtle Island just for myself. It was never about isolation. It was about transformation." Those sitting nearby leaned in, unsure what he meant, but the expression on his face was unmistakable. Eustace wasn't confessing out of regret. He was revealing a truth that had lived inside him for decades. He explained that every inch of Turtle Island was built to represent something: the cabins for self-reliance, the land for humility, the wilderness for balance. He said he wanted to prove that humans could still coexist with nature without destroying it. "I wasn't running from society," he said firmly. "I was studying it." For years, Eustace had watched the outside world collapse under its own weight: pollution, greed, disconnection, and he wanted to show that another way of living was still possible. "People thought I was hiding," he continued, "but really, I was building an example, a living answer to everything that's gone wrong out there." It was then that the truth hit everyone listening. Eustace wasn't a hermit. He was a teacher. His entire life had been one long experiment in human endurance, spiritual growth, and ecological truth. He confessed that the idea for Turtle Island came not from rebellion, but from revelation. After spending time traveling the country in his youth, riding horses across states, sleeping under open skies, he saw how detached people had become from the natural world. "I watched people lose their spirit," he said. "They don't even notice the stars anymore." That was the moment he decided to dedicate his life to something pure, something untouched by the noise of the modern world. He called Turtle Island a living museum of truth, a place to remember who we were before comfort made us forget. He revealed that for over 3 decades, he's been recording every change in the land, every storm, every animal behavior, and even the subtle shifts in human behavior among his students. "Nature talks," he said. "You just have to listen long enough to hear it." The cameras captured a side of Eustace few had ever seen: vulnerable, emotional, but completely at peace. He looked into the lens and admitted, "People always thought I was hard to understand. That's because they were listening to my words instead of watching my actions." Then came the statement that confirmed what fans had always suspected. "Everything I did here, every piece of wood, every lesson, every struggle, it was never about surviving nature. It was about remembering how to be human." That single line sent shockwaves across the online wilderness community when the footage leaked. It reframed everything: the TV appearances, the rumors, the years of silence. Eustace wasn't retreating from the world. He was trying to rebuild it, one lesson at a time. And with that revelation, the mystery surrounding his life began to make perfect sense. After Eustace's revelation, the world began to see Turtle Island in a completely new light. What many once viewed as an eccentric off-grid project was suddenly recognized as one of the most profound environmental and philosophical experiments of modern times. Eustace explained that his vision was never just to survive in the wilderness. It was to rebuild a bridge between man and nature, one generation at a time. He confessed that over the years, hundreds of apprentices had passed through Turtle Island's gates, learning not only to carve wood and build shelters, but to unlearn dependence on the modern world. He had quietly built a network of students who carried his lessons back into cities, schools, and communities across the country. "They think the legacy is this land," he said, "but the real legacy is the people who remember." For decades, he had documented their growth, letters, photos, journals, all locked away in his cabin. When he finally opened those journals to the ET crew, they were stunned. Each page was filled with handwritten reflections, sketches, and even predictions about humanity's future. Eustace had chronicled everything: weather cycles, animal migrations, student behaviors, forming a detailed record of how the natural and human worlds changed over time. "This," he said, pointing to the pages, "is the proof that we can live differently." But Eustace also revealed something darker. He admitted that his mission had nearly destroyed him more than once. Years of financial strain, failed partnerships, and betrayals from those who misunderstood his purpose had left deep scars. He spoke of people who promised to protect Turtle Island, but instead tried to commercialize it, selling his image while twisting his message. "The world wanted a TV hero," he said bitterly, "but I was just a man trying to live honestly." At one point, the pressure became so unbearable that he considered selling the land entirely. But as he walked through the forest one evening, he said a single phrase stopped him cold. "The earth doesn't belong to you. It belongs to those who respect it." That night, he made a vow to continue, no matter the cost. He then revealed that, in the past few years, he had quietly begun training a select group of young people, what he called the Keepers, to inherit Turtle Island's mission. These were not television apprentices or volunteers. They were students chosen for their spirit, not their fame. "They're learning everything I know," he said with pride. "When I'm gone, they'll continue the message." His eyes filled with emotion as he added, "You see, I never built this place to last my lifetime. I built it to outlive me." Those words became the turning point of his legacy. The man once mocked for living in the past had, in fact, been preparing for the future all along. His story was no longer just about survival. It was about awakening. And as his truth finally came to light, even his harshest critics were forced to admit Eustace Conway had been right all along. As Eustace's words spread, fans and former students flooded social media with messages of gratitude and disbelief. The man they'd once seen as mysterious or distant had finally confirmed what they'd always felt. Eustace Conway wasn't just living in the wild, he was living for a purpose. In his next recorded message, his voice trembled slightly as he said, "I didn't do this for fame. I did this to remind people that we were never meant to be separate from the earth." He paused, looking around at the quiet forest behind him. "Everything we need to survive is already here. We've just forgotten how to listen." His confession struck a chord with millions. Former apprentices shared stories of how a single lesson from Eustace had changed their lives, how he taught them patience, respect, and gratitude for the smallest things. Some recalled nights by the fire when he spoke about freedom not as an idea, but as a responsibility. "You can't be free," he'd say, "if you can't feed yourself or heal the land you walk on." That wisdom became his final message to the world. Self-reliance isn't about isolation. It's about reconnection. As he finished the interview, Eustace wiped a tear from his weathered cheek.
It's hard for me to evaluate the deep psychology of those men, but as far as I can tell, they're threatened by anybody that doesn't fit into their perfect paragraph on their black and white crisp.
Just moments ago, breaking reports confirmed that FBI agents have officially uncovered a hidden underground bunker beneath Eustace Conway's Turtle Island Preserve. The man once hailed as the last American man has lived in solitude for decades, teaching survivalism and natural living to thousands. But what the FBI just found beneath his property may change everything we thought we knew about him. Sources say the discovery was made early this morning after an unmarked convoy arrived at his remote mountain land in North Carolina. Locals watched as agents surrounded the property and brought in heavy equipment. Within hours, a metal hatch disguised beneath the forest floor was exposed, revealing a concealed tunnel system that stretched deep underground. Witnesses say the agents' faces turned pale the moment the first door opened. Whatever Eustace was hiding down there, it wasn't what anyone expected. Make sure you watch till the end, because the truth about what lies beneath Turtle Island is more disturbing than you can imagine. For decades, Eustace Conway was celebrated as a modern-day pioneer, a man who walked away from the conveniences of civilization to live life as our ancestors once did. His Turtle Island Preserve became a sanctuary for those seeking simplicity, a place where students learned to make fire by hand, tan hides, and live from the land. But behind that public image, something else was quietly taking shape. Locals began whispering about unusual activity around the preserve. Long after dark, the sound of heavy machinery echoed through the woods. Massive shipments of steel and concrete were hauled in under tarps. One truck driver later admitted he was told never to ask questions, just to unload and leave. When questioned, Eustace brushed off the noise as simple maintenance work. Yet, a few months ago, satellite imagery picked up strange geometric outlines beneath the soil, patterns far too organized to be natural. Online sleuths suspected a secret storage area, perhaps even a fallout shelter. But now, after the FBI's discovery, it's clear this was far more sophisticated. The bunker's entrance was hidden behind a false section of the creek bank, camouflaged by moss and stones. It blended so seamlessly with the environment that even trained investigators missed it during earlier inspections. The question that now haunts everyone: why would a man who preached transparency and harmony with nature construct something so secretive and industrial beneath his land? Officials have hinted that federal law enforcement first became aware of the site after a confidential informant provided evidence of unauthorized underground construction. What began as a simple zoning violation escalated into a full-scale federal operation. According to reports, Eustace was nowhere to be found when agents arrived. His cabin stood empty, food still on the counter, a half-written journal entry by his bedside. The final line read simply, "When they come, the mountain will decide who stays." As dawn broke over the Blue Ridge Mountains, the FBI's excavation team moved in. Beneath layers of pine needles and soil, agents unearthed a circular steel hatch that seemed almost military in design. It was welded shut, with reinforced hinges strong enough to withstand a blast. It took nearly 3 hours to breach the first seal. When the door finally gave way, a rush of stagnant air poured out, cold, metallic, and heavy with the scent of oil. What the agents saw inside stopped them in their tracks. The entry tunnel descended sharply into darkness, lined with thick concrete walls and copper wiring running like veins through the ceiling. Flashlights revealed shelves of sealed jars, each labeled with dates going back more than 20 years. Further inside, the passage split into multiple corridors, leading to sections that appeared to have distinct purposes. One area resembled a control room, complete with generators, switch panels, and battery banks powered by both solar and hydroelectric energy. Another chamber was stacked floor to ceiling with dried goods, emergency rations, and medical supplies, all meticulously organized. But it wasn't the supplies that unsettled investigators. It was the presence of old maps and hand-drawn blueprints spread across a central table. They showed not only Turtle Island, but also several surrounding counties, each marked with coded symbols and handwritten notes like Phase 1 Perimeter, Signal South, and Reinforce Line. Agents began to suspect they had stumbled onto something far beyond a survivalist's storage space. In a sealed cabinet, they discovered encrypted notebooks, pages filled with coordinates and references to containment, surveillance zones, and emergency initiation. No one could explain what any of it meant. One officer later told local news, off record, "It looked like the kind of place someone built not to survive nature, but to survive something else entirely." As investigators continued deeper, they realized the bunker was far larger than anyone imagined, spanning multiple underground levels carved directly into the mountain itself. By the time the FBI reached the second level of the bunker, even veteran agents admitted they'd never seen anything like it. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. Unlike the upper floor, which seemed practical, filled with food, tools, and survival gear, the lower section felt almost scientific. Glass containers lined the walls, each filled with preserved animal organs, soil samples, and handwritten tags. Some were marked with species names found only in that region. A makeshift lab table stood in the center, covered in microscopes, notebooks, and vials labeled with strange codes like S3B and W12 strain. But what disturbed investigators most was a notebook lying open beneath a flickering light. Inside were pages describing ecosystem preservation through isolation and controlled repopulation of natural species. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed like a biologist's notes, but to the agents, it hinted at something much larger, maybe even experimental. Nearby, they found communication equipment, shortwave radios, encrypted transmitters, and antennas connected to a long cable that stretched up through the mountain, possibly to a disguised receiver outside. It looked like Eustace had built his own underground network. One agent theorized he could have been intercepting frequencies, perhaps monitoring government channels, or even communicating with others off-grid. Tapes labeled Intercept A through Intercept H were stacked beside the transmitters, but before agents could review them, federal officials sealed the area. Whatever was recorded remains undisclosed to this day. Even more chilling, a sealed steel door at the far end of the bunker caught everyone's attention. It had a biometric keypad and a handprint scanner, technology far beyond what anyone expected to find in a rustic survivalist's home. The lead agent ordered it opened. Sparks flew as they cut through the lock, the echo of grinding metal filling the bunker. When the door finally swung open, every flashlight beam froze on what lay beyond. The sight, according to one anonymous insider, changed the tone of the entire investigation. Behind the heavy steel door was a room unlike anything the agents had seen before. It was smaller, colder, and lit by a single flickering bulb that buzzed faintly overhead. Stacked along the concrete walls were old VHS tapes, reel-to-reel audio recorders, and weathered boxes marked with handwritten dates. Some labels went as far back as the early 1990s. But what sent chills through the investigation team were the names scrawled beside those dates. Names of people from the nearby counties, some of whom had been missing for years. The tapes were immediately confiscated, and agents began playing back the first few reels using one of the old projectors found nearby. The footage showed long, continuous clips of the surrounding woods, some at night, others during rainstorms, always from hidden vantage points. Occasionally, a person would appear in the frame, unaware they were being filmed. The camera would zoom in, hold steady, and then abruptly cut out. Some reels bore the initials EC, while others carried numbers followed by the word subject. According to unverified leaks, several frames showed federal agents surveying Turtle Island years ago. Proof, perhaps, that Eustace had been under observation himself. But that wasn't all. One of the boxes contained maps with red string connecting remote sites across the Appalachians. Each point was labeled Node, followed by a number. Investigators suspect these may indicate other underground locations, possibly built using the same design. Along one wall sat a table filled with Polaroids, hundreds of them, depicting wildlife, night skies, and occasionally human faces. The final stack of photos, however, looked staged. Figures standing in a clearing, arranged in symmetrical formations like part of some forgotten ritual or coded message. Officials have refused to comment on what those images mean, but an anonymous technician reportedly described the last tape as something we can never unsee. From that point on, all evidence from the bunker was sealed and transferred to a classified storage facility. Whatever Eustace recorded down there, the public wasn't meant to find out. In the days following the bunker's discovery, the investigation grew into a full-scale operation involving both federal and state authorities. Agents set up a perimeter around Turtle Island Preserve, and access to the property was completely restricted. Locals who lived nearby reported hearing low mechanical sounds echoing through the forest at night, like drilling or generators running deep underground. The FBI refused to comment, but whispers began spreading among residents and online communities who followed Eustace's life closely. Some believed the bunker was part of a survival network he'd been quietly building for decades. A refuge designed to preserve human knowledge and natural species in case of global collapse. Others thought it was a government research site he had uncovered and taken over. What truly unsettled everyone were leaked details suggesting Eustace might not have worked alone. Agents allegedly found letters sealed in plastic within the bunker, written to unidentified individuals and signed only with a symbol resembling a triangle intersected by 3 lines. The letters contained cryptic language, phrases like, "The harvest window is closing," and "The ridge will remember who kept the code." Investigators also discovered stacks of documents referencing the preservation network, with coordinates leading to remote locations across the Appalachian Trail. Whether these were safe zones, resource caches, or meeting points remains unknown. Meanwhile, those who once studied under Eustace struggled to process the news. To them, he had been a mentor, a teacher who valued purity, simplicity, and connection to the land. But now, many questioned whether they had unknowingly helped him construct something far greater and more secretive than any of them ever imagined. As reporters pressed the FBI for details, the agency abruptly ended all public briefings. Officially, the site was now part of a national security investigation. Unofficially, agents were still inside the mountain, unearthing layer after layer of a hidden world built by the man everyone once called the last true frontiersman. Within a week, The story exploded nationwide. Major media outlets swarmed the sleepy mountain town, desperate for any detail about what had been uncovered beneath Turtle Island. Drone footage captured convoys of unmarked vehicles leaving the property under heavy guard, some carrying sealed metal crates, and others covered entirely with black tarps. Eyewitnesses claimed that a separate team, wearing hazmat suits, entered the site days later, fueling speculation that something hazardous had been discovered inside the bunker. Anonymous insiders hinted that the FBI had confiscated metallic objects of unknown composition, along with coded journals that referenced vibrational patterns and energy readings. For a man devoted to simplicity and nature, these discoveries made no sense. Internet forums lit up overnight with wild theories. Was Eustace studying magnetic anomalies? Had he found ancient relics buried beneath the Appalachian soil? Or was he safeguarding something the government wanted hidden? As tension rose, Eustace himself was nowhere to be found. Some locals swore they saw him hiking north through the woods just before dawn on the day of the raid. Others insisted he'd been taken into custody quietly and relocated for questioning. Neither claim was ever confirmed. Former friends who'd once worked with him began speaking out, some defending his legacy, others admitting they'd seen glimpses of his secretive side. One apprentice recalled that Eustace occasionally spoke of the Great Reset, a coming shift that would wipe the slate clean for those who forgot the old ways. Another remembered seeing large blueprints spread out across his cabin table, showing what looked like underground chambers and airflow systems. Still, no one could connect these clues to the scale of what investigators had uncovered. The FBI's silence only deepened the mystery. They released a single statement saying the objects removed from the property were of investigative interest, and that further analysis is ongoing. But off the record, one local sheriff summed it up best. Whatever they found down there, it wasn't meant for the public to see. Not long after the FBI sealed off Turtle Island, strange things began happening across the surrounding mountains. Residents living miles away reported hearing deep mechanical hums echoing through the forest after midnight. A low vibration that made windows rattle and animals flee. Hunters spoke of unmarked helicopters hovering silently over the valley, their lights off, their presence lingering for hours. Others swore they'd seen strange flickering lights under the soil near the preserve, like the earth itself was glowing from beneath. The government dismissed these reports as paranoia, but those who lived closest to the site knew better. Even the streams near the preserve had changed. Their water turned slightly metallic, with fish dying overnight in large numbers. One retired ranger who'd once worked with Eustace said quietly, "The mountain's breathing different now. Whatever they woke up down there, it's not sleeping anymore." Soon, conspiracy forums exploded with theories. Some claimed the bunker was built atop a natural energy field, something Eustace had tapped into, perhaps unknowingly. Others believed it was part of a hidden Cold War network, one of several continuity of government shelters scattered through Appalachia. Then came the most chilling detail. Hikers began vanishing near the old boundary of the preserve. Their camps were found abandoned, gear intact, fires still burning, but the people themselves were gone. The FBI denied any connection, yet locals noticed new warning signs posted around the perimeter. Bright yellow with the words, "Federal Restricted Zone." No such label had ever existed there before. Months later, a leaked memo hinted that the agency was conducting subterranean environmental tests, though what exactly they were testing for remains classified. The once lively Turtle Island once a place of peace and teaching, now stood silent, guarded by fences, drones, and questions no one dared ask aloud. For many, the biggest mystery wasn't what the FBI found, but why Eustace built it in the first place. Months have passed since the raid, yet the mystery surrounding Eustace Conway's hidden bunker continues to deepen. The once open gates of Turtle Island Preserve are now sealed behind warning signs and barbed wire. Federal presence remains strong, agents come and go without a word, and motion-activated cameras now guard every trail that once welcomed visitors. The man who preached living in harmony with nature has become the center of one of the most secretive investigations in modern Appalachian history. Officially, the FBI maintains that what they discovered beneath his land is classified for national security reasons. Unofficially, whispers from within the agency tell a different story. According to a source close to the investigation, the bunker extended far deeper than originally reported. Multiple layers descending into bedrock, each one more complex and advanced than the last. They claim the lowest chamber was sealed by an enormous vault door, reinforced with technology far beyond anything Conway could have built alone. Inside that final level, investigators allegedly found crystalline structures embedded in the rock, objects that emitted faint electromagnetic readings and heat signatures despite no visible power source. Whether natural formations or something else, no one outside federal clearance has seen them since. Some speculate they're ancient geological anomalies. Others think Eustace uncovered something buried long before he arrived, something the government couldn't allow to surface. In the small nearby town of Boone, life has never been the same. Businesses that once thrived on Turtle Island tourism now sit empty. Locals avoid the mountain after dark, claiming they've seen shadowy figures patrolling the woods. Figures too tall, moving too silently to be human. Hunters describe electronic interference near the site. Phones die, compasses spin, and animals refuse to cross certain clearings. It's as if the land itself has become electrified, alive, warning intruders to stay away. Those who knew Eustace best, former students, friends, and fellow survivalists, remain torn between disbelief and dread. One man, who trained under Eustace for years, insists he once overheard him talking late into the night on his radio, repeating a phrase over and over, "The mountain keeps what the world forgets." At the time, it sounded poetic. Now it feels like a warning. Reporters have tried for months to contact Eustace, but he's vanished without a trace. No family member, friend, or colleague has seen him. Some claim he's hiding deep in the wilderness, living completely off-grid once again, watching from afar as the world debates what he left behind. Others whisper that the government knows exactly where he is, but that he's being kept silent under a non-disclosure order. Either way, the man who once symbolized freedom from modern chaos has become the focus of an enigma that defies logic. As for the bunker itself, it remains sealed, its corridors dark, its secrets buried beneath layers of rock and secrecy. But sometimes, on still nights when the wind cuts through the Appalachian pines, locals say they can hear a faint mechanical hum rising from beneath the soil, as if the mountain itself is breathing. Whether that sound is the echo of forgotten machinery or something far older awakening below, no one knows. The truth about what the FBI really found under Turtle Island may never be made public. But one thing is certain: Eustace Conway's legacy will never be the same. What began as a story of a man escaping society has transformed into a legend of hidden technology, secret networks, and a mystery that stretches far beyond the mountains of North Carolina. And for those who still venture close enough to hear that hum, it's a reminder that sometimes the quietest places on earth hold the loudest secrets.